Good afternoon, all, and welcome to the webinar today. Right, I'm Pranat Chawla, and I lead partnerships for CLEAResult. My role focuses on this whole intersection of partners, pilots, and innovation, and that's why this webinar that we're going to be sort of talking about today is very dear to me. Right, so a bit about me. I'm a trained mechanical engineer, licensed as well, and I worked in this space for the last 13 odd years. I've worked in both Canada and the US and in different capacities, all the way from research and development to product management to program management and delivery and practice management as well. Right, so that said, I'm going to sort of ask my panelists to go and talk a little bit about themselves before we dive into the webinar. I'm going to ask Roger to go ahead, please.
Thank you, Pran. Roger Wise. I've been working with CLEAResult for 7 years, running the C&I pilots with our partnership utility partners. Prior to that, I was a contractor doing energy efficiency, building automation and controls. So great fit coming over here, 14 years in that field as well. So that's a brief history. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Roger. Miles?
Thank you, Brad. My name is Miles Beal. I'm the Ideation and Incubation Manager at Consumers Energy. I've been here in this role for coming on a couple of years now. Before then, I've had professional pit stops at a couple of different implementation providers, as well as the state of Michigan in their energy services unit. Good to be here today.
Thanks, Miles. And last but not least, Trevor.
Yeah, hey everyone, Trevor Blander here. I work with Miles Beal at Consumers Energy, pilots manager, mainly focused on the business, small medium business environment. I've been in this role for about 1.5 years now. Most of my experience is actually on the power generation side of the business. So yeah, good to be here.
Great, thank you, Trevor. Okay, so I guess let's dive into the topics here, right, that we'll be covering today. The first section, right, and we'll focus on why is innovation important, right? We'll talk about the drivers and challenges and the innovation process within Consumers Energy, and then we'll talk about the meat of this, right? The next two topics are going to be the meat of the webinar today. The first one is going to be focused on how to define a pilot, right? And the next topic is going to be sort of looking at what needs to be done to make sure that pilot is effective, right, when launched, and what needs to be done to scale that pilot, right? That said, let me sort of kick this webinar off, with a question, right, to our panelists here. Why is innovation important, right? And we have a few drivers on the slide here, but those are not necessarily all-encompassing, but there's more to it than that. Next slide, please. So Mats, I'm going to pose this to you, right, and have you sort of going to start this discussion. Why do you think we need to sort of innovate in this space?
Yeah, the big question, right? So these, what you have on the slide here are the three kind of big hitters, and I want to kind of focus in on changing business landscape. And to me, this is not only changes in what your business needs. I know personally we have roadmaps and milestones that are built out in the monthly increments, the quarterly increments, the yearly. We have multi-year roadmaps. Those roadmaps, as we all know, are not ironclad. You're going to find yourself pivoting a whole lot. And as people who run the pilots, people who do product innovation, we need to be nimble and pivot to meet the needs of the business. We're literally incubating and facilitating the needs of like our core business partners. So we need to listen to them and drive what we think is appropriate to meet their needs. Beyond the business needs too, Brad, I focus a lot on the regulatory environment. Things can change really quick between our Public Service Commission, the interveners that we have to work with as well. Priorities shift really, really quick. So again, being nimble and really staying on your toes and having a good backlog and catalog of ideas that you can pull from that are vetted to meet those needs pretty quickly, super important. That's a big reason why we place such an emphasis on innovation at Consumers Energy. Evolving consumer habits too, and that kind of plays hand in hand with me for the third bullet point, the technology evolution. Whether it's EVs or solar or storage, I mean, we've seen tremendous growth and just a whole landscape change over the last couple of years here. Before that, we had to deal with LEDs. So I mean, we're no strangers to this. Things change quickly, and you really have to be on your toes and meet the market where it is, or else you're going to be left behind and leave savings on the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I mean, let's take another sort of stab at it and sort of look at some challenges, right? I know we sort of went to the drivers here. In the next slide, please. Thank you. And again, these are not sort of all-encompassing, but just some thoughts on what could be the challenges, right? Before we dive into this, both Miles and Trevor, right? I just wanted to sort of invite the audience to also sort of send in their challenges as well. Again, the goal today is to sort of have a free-flowing discussion. So if you have any sort of comments or questions, please keep them coming in. I would love to sort of take them here and then have an open discussion about it as well. That said, Miles or Trevor.
Yeah, I welcome feedback as well. This is a good time to commiserate. It's a safe space. Let your feelings out about these challenges, because I know a lot of us go through these, whether it is organizational structures not working to your benefit. We in the pilots and product innovation team, I mean, we've before I was even a part of the team, lived underneath the demand side management folks, and then we had our own kind of standalone department. Now we've been folded into our transportation and renewables team too. So, having to learn those new teams, that's always a challenge. Having to communicate with all of your internal stakeholders, let alone the external ones, is a huge chore, a necessary one, but still a huge chore. We also get into that issue of budget. What can you spend your money on? From like even a regulatory perspective, when we're talking about how do we spend money, it's so that we can capture energy savings. And there's a lot of like really nice non-energy benefit stuff out there that we might want to pursue, but we can't justify it. So that kind of changes the nature of how you think about even designing a program and moving something forward. And then kind of in that same vein, when we're evaluating programs, making sure that we're being cost effective. Could have the best and brightest idea in the world, but if it doesn't pass that metric, then you're between a rock and a hard place. So being cognizant of those challenges and having mitigation plans and being really proactive is definitely something we strive to do.
Yeah, that's a great point, Miles. I mean, the hope is that, right, as we sort of go through this, right, and hopefully by the time we get to the key takeaways, we would have at least sort of given you some sort of key insights, right, with which we can sort of mitigate these challenges. And perhaps if you have some more challenges, right, we'd love to sort of also understand that as well. So please keep your questions coming. Okay, so I guess with that said, right, let's sort of take a look at this whole process of innovation, right, within Consumers Energy, right, and how are you approaching that a little differently? And perhaps Trevor, right, if you wanted to sort of kick this off a little bit, and then we'll sort of go between you and Miles.
Yeah, sounds good, Brad. To kind of start, these three kind of go together, but our focus, especially the last couple of years, is trying to be intentional with our process and make sure we kind of follow that roadmap that we set in front of us. So we have that product innovation process, and the key from that is just making sure we're intentional with the products we pilot and make sure they're actually solving a market problem or a customer problem, and then taking it through there, making sure the prototypes and then the business proposal are all tying back to that, and making sure we're doing the right pilots that meet the needs of our customers. Because if it does, then the marketing piece, the customer outreach on the implementation side will just be all that much easier, and we're meeting the needs of our customers. So that's just a little bit on that. The goal is to ideate and implement pilots without looking for perfection. So I'll talk about this a little more, but just making sure we're key in what our learning objectives are, and then what we really need to prove out in the pilot, and then when is it good to go to scale, and what are we really trying to answer? Progress over perfection is the buzzword that goes around. So those are just a couple of my thoughts. Miles, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I'll step in and say that, just for kind of a point of clarification here, when we talk about product innovation process and, being aware and mindful of customer problems, you're probably already talking about this in your organization. Sometimes it gets called design thinking, sometimes it gets called, outside in product design. You might call it product lifecycle management. These are all really analogous things. We've kind of taken bits and pieces of those kind of ways of thinking and built it into our own, I'll say, proprietary kind of system that we use here at Consumers Energies to evaluate these things. But as we continue to have these conversations, it's good to be aware that you're probably already doing some of this. It's just a matter of thinking about it in maybe some different terms or organizing things a little bit more clearly to really maximize the results.
Great. Thanks, Miles and Trevor. In just sort of, wanted to acknowledge that I've seen a few questions on me, I guess, sounding a bit garbled. Hopefully this is a little better. Just wanted a quick thumbs up from the panelists. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, and this is, question on how are we running and testing, the programs here. How scientific are we able to make the test? For example, are you able to control for other variables that might be affecting outcomes? So Perry, I think, just wanted to sort of acknowledge that question. I think, we'll sort of get into that question a little bit in more detail as we go through the how we ideate, right? I think, there's a lot of the things that you're asking on, what variables, and especially, right, when we sort of launch a pilot. I know Trevor and Roger will be talking about how we pivot, right? If something is not working, how do we capture that data, and how do we pivot, and how do we scale, right? So I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that question, and we'll get to it. If you don't answer that as we talk, hopefully we'll sort of pick it up back again. And Earl, yes, I think agreed. Net to gross is important. Miles and Trevor, I don't know if you had any sort of thoughts on that. I think this was just a comment from Earl saying that net to gross is important as well as we sort of look at innovation, and we need to just keep that in mind.
I certainly wouldn't refute that. No.
Okay. All right. So let's dive into the meat, right? At least the first phase of it on how we sort of ideate right. So Miles, I think, Nick, if you can sort of go to the next slide, please. These are the key themes that we'll be discussing today, right? And we'll sort of start looking at, how do we define a problem statement, right? And then, then we'll sort of, take that problem statement and then we're looking at some, what if concepts, right? This is our quick concepts that we generate to sort of address the problem statement that we've sort of identified. And then from there, we'll go into stakeholder engagement, what does that look like? And, how do we define a pilot, right? What do we typically include? And again, we have some examples as well as we sort of walk through these different steps here. And again, if you have encountered things a little differently, or if you do things a little differently, please, please comment and please keep the questions coming. We'll sort of would love to hear more about that as well. So that's it, Miles. I mean, let's just sort of look at this problem definition, right? What I know that as the incubation manager, right, you need to define a lot of these problems, right? So what is your sort of philosophy on defining problems, and what other data sources do you typically use to sort of get to that?
Yeah.
Would that be, thank you.
Yeah. So for those problem statements, we're thinking about the market at large, and that includes you as the utility. So I mean, this can be your end use customer, it could be your contractors in your trade ally network, or it could be an internal process depending on what the actual pilot is here. Those problem statements, and I'm going to go back to the customer here. Typically, when we think of, like, if you ask your customer, what's the problem? Like, what don't you like about dealing with the utility? what are they going to tell you? They're going to say, my bill's too dang high and the power shuts off when it shouldn't shut off every now and then. It's really getting to a point in your market research, in your surveys, in your interactions with those customers out in the field to get to that next level, to double click into those problems. So if your bill's too high, what's that preventing you from doing? How do we get to that next layer? I know for me in the pilot space, I would love to open up our rates and take a hatchet to them and maneuver them around so that they work for every single customer. That's kind of outside the scope of what I do. So you have to do what you can do here, and that's create a pilot and develop a product that solves those second and third order problems. Same thing goes with the business. If we have business problems where interaction with the call center is too high and they can't manage the inflow of calls, what can we do on the pilots team to divert some of our customer problems so that they're not calling into the call center and bogging them down? How can we save on operational costs there? That's another question. So really, I would urge people when you're starting your journey, if you haven't already, when you're defining these problems and getting these statements, really push. Spend the time here to get down to like that really the root, the heart of the problem, and how the customer feels and experiences that pain in real time.
And Miles, perhaps I think let's also sort of look at this from a mature portfolio point of view, right? I mean, as you would know, Consumers Energy has a very mature, I guess, portfolio of these offerings, right? So perhaps throw in some light right around the fact that why is it important to still be focusing on these problem statements or these tools that some might feel are pretty basic, right? To sort of even solve this, would be right and typically sort of see in a mature portfolio, and how do you sort of innovate with these basic tools in a mature portfolio?
Yeah, well, and you bring up a good thing. I mean, that's the kind of the whole thing is we have a mature portfolio. So why all the questions? Don't we have all the answers already? We've got a whole bunch of products. The truth is your products might not be solving your customers' problems as well as they could be. So putting in this front end work in your ideation process allows you to take these voice of the customer verbatims, these sentiments that you collect, and actually compare it up against what's in your product portfolio. You might discover that you're not marketing effectively, your outreach is bad, something could be wrong with the delivery of your existing products, and you can decide, well, hey, that might be something that we pilot on, or that's a learning that we can pass on to a core teammate. You might find that, yeah, there's just a big hole in the portfolio that we were blind to before. We then kind of, once we kind of know the symptom of the portfolio, whether it's just poor delivery or we have a hole, we can then turn into some of these things that we see here in the funnel, the program data, the socioeconomic trends, to help us kind of build out a product that can meet the market problem where it is. So many times we find ourselves, getting the product first and trying to back into that market problem and telling ourselves that it fits really well instead of actually doing the homework. And one of the benefits of having a mature portfolio is that we've got a lot of data. We have a standalone data department ourselves that is producing reports and studies all the time, so we can pull that off the shelves. We can pair that with the information that's given to us by you all and our other implementing partners to make sure that we're, again, intentionally crafting a product around the customer problem, using all these tools in our toolbox that we have, from past participation data, looking at market trends, where technology is heading, and you've got a lovely list here. I know for us, the customer surveys, the verbatims play really big over here in our space. For other folks, it could be something else, but just know that there are plenty of tools in the toolbox that you can use to get to the answers that you need.
Yeah, that's a great point, Miles. I think we've oftentimes seen how the programs get designed right first, and we fit those programs into our markets, right? But oftentimes, right, just bring it in that perspective of what are these stakeholders thinking, right? And sort of looking, and at least starting our journey there will help us either expand upon what we're already doing in the mature portfolio, or tweak certain approaches, right? So again, there are different variables, right, in these things that you can sort of look at. You can tweak how to go to market, right? You can tweak a different, or you can go sort of target a different segment, or you can perhaps even sort of go and change the measure mix, right? So on that note, I mean, let's just sort of dive into a bit of an example here, right? I mean, and let's probably talk about, heat pumps. I'm sure, heat pumps is on everybody's mind, and how, with what you said, right, as to how a mature portfolio has a lot of data, right, that we would have access to. How are we sort of looking at heat pumps, right? And I'll sort of spend some time talking about what did we do with that data, right? That you have, and how did we sort of distill the problem, right? And what solution, right, have we sort of been thinking about it from that point of view? So again, the benefit of a mature portfolio is data, right? So specifically for heat pumps, I mean, what you see here is just examples of, right, the data that we have access to, or the customer journey mappings, and so on and so forth. And when we looked at it, and specifically when we had this issue of heat pumps, we looked at over 30,000 audits, right? The data from over 30,000 audits that were conducted in the last couple of years to understand what the trends are. What are the systems that exist in people's homes today? What are the barriers for uptake, right, in heat pump uptake? What's the age? And we also sort of went back and spoke to contractors to understand, why are you not able to sell more heat pumps? What is the issue here, right? And essentially, after taking all that information, right, we attempted to define the problem, right? So Nick, if you could go to the next slide. Great. Okay, so this is, though this problem looks pretty succinct, I think it took us a lot of time to get here, right? To sort of say, yes, the heat pump technology is evolving, and consumers being in Michigan, it's a colder climate, right? So it is evolving and can run in colder climates, but most contractors don't offer it to the customers, right? So that itself is a powerful realization, right? That took us some time to get to, but we understand that most don't. Why do they not do it, right? So we have also understood that there are certain reliability concerns that is preventing these customers and contractors from accepting and adopting this technology. Now, again, seems very basic, but the more you ask these why, right, and you get to that sort of understanding that, okay, we have heard from contractors saying that we don't want to propose higher efficiency units or heat pumps just because we have to go back and fix it, and it's a drag on us. We're not able to sell more, and we don't want to do that. Or who's going to pay for it, right? So there's a lot of that aspect that we sort of identified there. And because of all the concerns that you've sort of identified, our customers, and we also came to know that they don't want to pay the higher install costs up front, right? And they don't want to pay the annual maintenance costs, or the or they don't want to be responsible for failures, right? If it fails, I don't want to pay to have that replaced, right? So with all that said, how can we as a utility, right, solve this problem, right? So Miles, I'm gonna have you go through the what if concept framework quickly, and then we'll sort of look at the example of what did we sort of ideate for this heat pump problem statement that we just sort of outlined.
Yeah, sure. When we say what if, I know that sometimes it gets thrown around as like how might we statements too, just to make sure that we're being inclusive with our language. But yeah, so with you and I, Brad, I mean, we have monthly check-ins to iterate and reiterate again on these concepts as we continue to pull out learnings. I mean, you at CLEAResult brought a lot of really solid data for like age of products in market, and meeting with contractors to understand product difficulties. I know that we have run other heat pump pilots where we have similar sentiments from contractors not wanting to do that. make the installs. It bogs down sales times. Customers not wanting to pay the upfront costs and really having to jack up the incentives in order to move the needle. So we take in those learnings and then we again just iterate on it. What if we offered a leasing option for these heat pumps? What if we brought down that front end cost without having to raise up our incentives to a rate that was no longer cost effective? That solves the customer problem. We then have to think about, what does that do for the contractor? What does that do to their sales cycle? How will they really adopt this leasing product that we're trying to put into the market? So then you have to go back out, you have to talk to the contractors. And when I say talk to them, put something on paper. It's way easier to have a conversation. You're going to get better information from them if you have something tangible that you can show somebody. Sometimes we call that prototyping. Sometimes that's just the way conversations happen. But either way, go do that. But yeah, you've put the solution up here on the board. I mean, the go-to-market is really partnering with an organization that allows for the cost to come down at the front end for the customer, and then the win for the contractor is they have a way to sell these higher margin items, so that helps their bottom line. They also get the opportunity to be the person who services these units, and then when it comes time for the lease to expire, they're first in the door to re-up the sale. So it's one of those rare wins for the customer, win for the contractor, win for us. But again, we really had to marinate on this thing for months and months and months in order to get it right.
Absolutely, and I think this goes back to that question that we had right from the audience on do we need to do all this in a mature portfolio, right? Because without doing all this, I don't think we would have sort of landed on the solution, right? Without sort of understanding the data, right? And also understanding the problem. Now, and I want to move quickly to the next few things here, right? So, but this is not the only problem that we solve, right? So, right, Miles, on a monthly basis, we have 16, right, and 20 sort of ideas that we sort of look at, right, at any given time frame, sort of understand again. This mature portfolio is all encompassing, right? So any thoughts on what do you typically use to sort of rank these, what if concepts?
Yeah, so as we're kind of coming back to the drawing board every month and moving our priorities around, I'm talking internally to our stakeholders, whether that's folks like Trevor, people in other teams, our research departments. Could be that we're out in the field and we get customer feedback and we realize we have to make a move more sooner than later. It could be a regulatory issue that comes up and we have to make accommodations that way. It really is on you, the person who is administering the portfolio, to stay abreast of your market, to stay abreast of your organization and react accordingly, and then communicate that back to your implementers. You as that fulcrum is incredibly important for prioritizing and delivering on your priorities.
No, that makes sense, Miles. And again, what we do is we typically sort of track these ideas, right, as we shown in the bottom right quadrant here. And Nick, next, please. I know we're a little bit behind. I want to keep us moving here. Okay, so again, I think we touched on the stakeholder engagement, right? But I did want to quickly sort of mention that after we sort of ideated on that pilot concept, we went back to the contractor segment. We spoke to the contractors about, hey, if we were to offer this solution to you, will you participate? Do you foresee an uptick in heat pumps, right? Because I think our objectives are to sort of see an uptick in heat pumps. Our objectives are to sort of bring a different go-to-market approach that is not being done today, right? So we went back, captured their sentiment, right? And now we have defined a pilot, and we'll talk a little bit briefly about what entails that whole sort of definition of a pilot. But before we do that, Miles, I know you mentioned briefly about internal stakeholder engagement, especially in a siloed organization. How important do you think is this internal stakeholder engagement?
It's critical. I mean, you can't run a pilot without keeping everybody abreast. So, I mean, when you think about all the moving parts, you've got marketing departments, you have IT departments that probably need to be involved. You have your core portfolio that probably needs to weigh in. We have a very, very well-defined and all-encompassing RACI. at Consumers Energy. So we know who's responsible, who's accountable, up and down the organization. We have quarterly check-ins to review concepts. There's ad hoc meetings in between, and really everybody gets to weigh in with their feedback for not only their opinions on how it impacts the customer, but how, more importantly, how it impacts their work internally. If we're trying to push out an IT solution and there's no bandwidth, that's on us for not knowing. If it's going to delay a project 6, 9, 9 months, 12 months, that's on us for not knowing. So if you want to be successful, you really need to communicate with your hub services internally, or else you're just going to miss your mark.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Miles. I think I was just sort of looking at a question that just came in, right? So I think, the question is sort of talking about how would you pick a partner, right? Without having to go through an RFP process. Now, I guess, I'm going to assume, Con, that when you say partner contractor, you're referring to somebody that's going to help implement pilots, right? I think, Miles, I don't know, if you had some thoughts on that. I think it's you could sort of interpret this a few different ways, but just wanted to sort of, pose that question to you to see if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, without going through a formal RFP process, which can be time consuming and lengthy and might not lead to the results that you want to do, it really is a matter of networking. Hitting the conference circuit is not a bad idea. If you can find something in your region, go to it, shake people's hands, go to the booths, make your industry connections. That in-person connection and building those relationships, if you're not going to go through your supply chain group to do the RFP, is probably your best bet.
Great. Okay, let's move to the next slide here, Nick. Thank you. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just wanted to make sure that we define what a pilot is, right? So this is just essentially all the things that we will need to sort of, again, pass on to our next set of stakeholders, like Trevor, right? They'll sort of take the pilot that's defined here and we'll sort of implement it, right? So the documentation and handoff are very critical in a mature, portfolio, especially when you have access to these resources, right? To sort of focus on incubation, to focus on implementation, right? So that handoff, so this definition, right, has been helping us to sort of make that handoff to Trevor, right? So that Trevor can sort of, take it, and then either at that point, it could be an RFP or it could be a sole source, depending on the way you would sort of operate, right? You can sort of get these things implemented. Okay, Nick, next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about pilot management, right? So Trevor, I think this is where you would come in, right? And once it gets handed off to you, what's your philosophy on managing these pilots effectively?
Yeah. So at this point, this used to, before I came in this role, this used to be a position that was all encompassing, ideation to implementation. But as with the mature portfolio and be able to meet those customer needs, as Miles just mentioned, with the role is kind of separated to be more intentional in solving those problems. So we kind of have that firm handoff between this stage and then once we get into kind of scaling the pilot. So kind of the philosophy on pilot management is we're just trying to be intentional, understanding where we're trying to go with it. So those learnings and objectives. And the key kind of word on that is positioning. Make sure we're positioned to the business portfolio. Are we meeting their needs, the gaps in the portfolio, so they can hit their energy savings target, their demand response targets, those types of items. And then making sure we're constantly refining that and pivoting and taking that voice of the customer along the journey to make sure we're meeting those needs. So positioning for the business portfolio and then also positioning to the customer. And then kind of another big thing in that with getting those customer statements in is like these are sometimes 2-3 year pilots. Customer preferences can change and the dynamics between the customers change. And then also volatility, COVID, for example, affecting outreach and those sort of things. So making sure we're intentional to pivot those pilots accordingly.
Great, thanks, Trevor. I mean, let's spend some time talking about the pilot launch process, right? So, Roger, if you want to sort of, talk a little bit about, what you typically sort of do go ahead and launch a pilot?
Yeah, so when it gets to launch, right, it's already been ideated. It's all the everything's been vetted, right, refined and sent out to us. So when it comes to us, it's a pilot, right? So what do? We have to get engaged marketing collateral, right? Let's prepare a dashboard that's usable for, right, keeping track of our outreach team, something that the client can engage with, right? And what we're using, we'll talk about a little later, right? Real time, right? We don't have to wait for our weekly meetings or our bi-weekly meetings or monthlies, right? Or our quarterly reports, right? The live dashboard, we can actually track the activities and the KPIs, right? I mean, it's the customer visits, how many, thank you. How many units did we get signed up, right? Out of those customer visits, right? What does that participation look like? How many of those customers actually sign an agreement with us to participate in the pilot, right? Making sure that we hit our KPIs, and in utilizing, right, this tree that we're showing here, right? Every one of these boxes are part of the pilot, so there's a lot here, a lot of information listed there with our check-ins on the right-hand side that you can see, right? But tracking those KPIs and making it very useful for the client, right, to have real-time data.
Yeah, no, that's a good point there, Roger. Again, the KPI tree, right, as an example that both Trevor and Roger, right, have used to sort of define KPIs for these pilots. Again, not an easy sort of thing to do there, Trevor. And I know you manage 15 pilots or so. So that's a lot of pilots, right? So just, if you had any thoughts on, how, it's not always easy to define these KPIs, right? So just wanted to sort of see if you had any thoughts on, this whole definition of KPIs or how important they are, how do they help you? Right?
Yeah, this is critical on our side. A couple things with this, Brad, is we talk about those learning objectives, those goals of the pilot, like where's our North Star that we're trying to reach, but then kind of breaking those down into milestones and into the KPIs eventually. So we're intentional in each year kind of developing those work plans to reestablish where we're at and how we need to pivot. Those milestones, as I mentioned, those are where the KPIs are the focus. So what's taking us off target? What are the key things we're trying to measure to get that next phase of the pilot, and then draw out those learnings? So yeah, they can vary. I know most of them are focused on those customer contacts, being intentional with that. Our energy savings targets, so how much, where we're at with spend, but also with attributed savings, how much is coming through from the programs. And yeah, so very important, but can defer pilot to pilot.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, I know Roger spoke about reporting and dashboards, right, being important. Perhaps there was a phase, right, Trevor, when we were sort of looking into this, where we were having these report out meetings every other week, and perhaps we were not spending as much time on actually solving problems, right? So any philosophy that you and Roger may have on, how did this reporting, right, sort of help you with that, I think would be much would be beneficial for customers here.
Yeah. So in a reporting, it's easy to get into a cadence and it just becomes redundant. So we have WORs, weekly operating reviews, where we measure those KPIs, any updates, tasks that are going on. You brought over the dashboard that we use to kind of document things, but what we realized from that is we're getting to this rhythm, but not really drawing out the problems that were going on in the pilot. So that's where we kind of like, hey, we're reporting out too much. We need time to really dive into the problems and then make sure we're adjusting, refining, and pivoting accordingly. So that's where we're like, hey, this year we need to, we're just gonna do bi-weekly. We're gonna focus on KPIs on a monthly basis instead of weekly. It's not important for our weekly needs. So let's be more intentional on problem solving. So keeping that action item roster, keeping ourselves up to speed on a bi-weekly basis, going through those actions, and then also making sure we're having those conversations, because as Brad mentioned, we usually have anywhere from 10 to 20 pilots going on. So it's easy to get lose focus on some, and this just helps us keep that rhythm and that cadence.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, reporting, right? So we spoke about reporting, and we spoke about pivoting and problem solving, right? So I do want to sort of dive into that. But before we do that, right, Roger, talk a little bit about how you capture the voice of the customers, right? I know you document that, right? And there's another dashboard that's going to sort of show up on your screen very soon, as soon as Nick, yeah, there you go. But right, what's your philosophy, and how do you sort of go about capturing this voice of the customer?
Yeah, and Miles really hit hard on it at the beginning, and couldn't agree more, right? When you're talking to the customer, it's important that they're very engaged. You have to meet them where they are, right? And every customer is in a different place on their journey, right? You have to speak in their language. So when you go in and talk to the customer, I still prefer pen and paper, right? My outreach team, go in with a pen and paper, right? Investigative journalist, right? Find out what their pain points are, right? They're already participating in your pilot, right? But what is it that we can help them address their pain points, right? Are they aware of, as simple as dirty equipment is inefficient equipment, right? And updating these, right? So we're tracking our customer visits. We're on the dashboard here and in the customer statement. So every week that they're talking to, repeatedly, if we're going to talk to them weekly or monthly, right? And then new customers, every time we make that contact, it's here, right? And every time that we have a conversation, it is looking for and, say bumping or steering that conversation to help us understand where they are, and then help them understand how we can help them efficiency wise, right? An example of that is, maybe the customer needs a new roof, right? But he doesn't know how he's going to pay for the new roof. Well, I'm presenting you a way to cut down your utility costs. True stories of this has actually happened, right? And then over 2 years, your energy savings can actually help you pay for your new roof. That's a win. It's a win for everybody, and really trying to solve those problems, right? What are those problem statements that each customer has, right? And they're unique, right, for every customer, and finding those. Pen and paper in hand also allows the customer to understand that you care about what they're talking about, and they tend to elaborate more, right? Give you a little more of insightful of what their business is doing, what is that market segment doing at this point in time, and really caring and becoming a trusted partner.
Yeah, no, that's great, Roger. And again, right, folks may ask, right, you capture voice of the customer, right, and during the whole process of ideation, why is it important again? Right? And I think, Trevor sort of, spoke to that, obviously, right? It's always important to keep capturing this, making sure that we are solving their problems. And as you know, problems change, with COVID, right? We've seen that happen in real time. We started with a pilot before COVID, right? And then COVID happened, and then we had a host of new problems that were not making that pilot design effective, right? So this, making sure that we're constantly staying focused on the voice of the customer, it helps us stay current with our pilot design. And because oftentimes these pilots, they end up running for about a year or two, depending on the complexity of the pilot, right? So it's always important to sort of have this captured and constantly sort of looking at this. So let's talk a little bit about, perhaps give an example, Roger and Trevor, and talk about how you've used these to pivot, right? And what did you notice? And it's okay to fail, right? I mean, we all sort of think that our solution is the best solution, but as we go to the market, we fail fast, right? So just talk a little bit about, what happened when you sort of tried launching a pilot like that.
Yeah, let's start, and I'll turn over to Trevor to pick up. But we were running a go-to customer pilot, right? So just coming out of the pandemic and right, ideation. This is the way the pilot's designed to work, and this is what we were going. So engaging that customer segment proved to be a little more difficult, and then getting the customer to understand how this was going to benefit them, right, and getting them onboarded, right, it became a little more difficult. We ended up with conversations with Trevor, right, and the utility partner, and explaining those learnings, right. We were able to then move to a different, go to a contractor base, right. Specifically, we're looking at rooftop units, and how can we help the customer reduce their energy usage there and increase the lifetime of the equipment, right. And the engagement of that sector going to the customer was rough. So then we went to the contractor and specifically asked the contractors for their customers who do not have a service agreement with them, right? So, hey, the contractor's thinking, this might work out well for me. I've been trying to get these guys on a service contract agreement. Here's my list. These are the people that I think we can talk to that have the equipment that in the age range that you're looking for. And that allowed us to get the participation that we needed to pivot. Trevor, you want to elaborate a little bit on that or add to it?
Yeah, I think the key thing there, Roger, is like it was a product that was designed for the customer, right, to meet their needs. But then we also realized at that time it was actually a significant need from the contractor as well. And it's actually a new tool or a kind of future tool for them to use that'll impact their business and save costs. Something that wasn't the objective of the pilot, but something we took in and then we're kind of able to refine from those learnings and kind of adjust the scope and the outreach accordingly. So definitely a huge win there.
Great.
That makes sense. Makes sense. So I guess, once we pivot, right? So Trevor, again, we sort of touched on this concept of handoff and on this concept of documenting everything, right? So how do you take this successful pilot, right? And then, how do you, and then how do you scale it, right? So any thoughts that you may have or how you approach that, I think would help. Would help.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the wrong and the right way to do it. But kind of the shift in focus is, we talk about the positioning of the product towards the customer, drawing that out, but then also positioning the product towards the business. And I think that's where you can't expect to transition these at the end. You got to keep your stakeholders aligned from the beginning and just keeping them aware, soliciting input and feedback from them on how the pilot is going and where it's intending to go. And if that's aligned, it just helps with the transition and being able to scale it as a commercial program. So that's the key thing we're starting to understand, and we're really trying to hit that hard now. And from the program perspective, is just making sure we're really driving, like in a mature portfolio, what is the gap? How is this meeting those energy savings needs? And being transparent on what those are. Example, dollars per kWh is a huge metrics that they're looking to, is how is this going to impact my costs, and then what's the value brought out of that? And they're not all the same. So some of the questions we're trying to answer is what the lifetime savings of a product is. $15 per kWh is different if it's only 6 years of lifetime savings versus 15 years. And so just being intentional of what those things are, and then also the market potential and demand. So when we're looking at evaluation and research, making sure we understand where that market's headed, what the potential is there, and kind of making sure we have that research all together with us to kind of package and send over to the product team.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thanks, Trevor. I know we're very close to the end of the time. I just want to make sure that we have some time for more questions. So let's sort of jump to the key takeaways here, right? And hopefully, I think we'll sort of hit on those key takeaways. Miles, I know you discussed the regulatory construct here. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you approach that whole discussion there?
Yeah, when it comes to the regulatory side of things, we're fortunate enough to have regulators that converse pretty regularly with us, pretty openly, and understand that we're a business that has business needs, and that sometimes you have to put that business first to then meet the needs of your customer. So they have allowed for the 5% of our DSM budget to be moved specifically within pilots, which is critical. I know that not everybody is as fortunate to have that, and that your funding might come from somewhere else, and it might not be as flexible or as consistent as ours. And then really, when it comes to sort of pushing the envelope beyond what is considered normal, we do it with all of our annual filings, but if you do have a regulatory department that has a good standing with your regulators, and you want to push the envelope, get out in front of them early. Let them know your intentions so that you're not paying for it on the back end, really. Kind of common sense, but it's worth repeating.
Absolutely. And I think, the second takeaway that we have is make sure that you utilize resources, right? External resources. I think this goes back to the comment that Colm had. And Colm, I think, part of another approach that you could potentially take is if you have an implementer, right, already in place, perhaps think of expanding their scope to include some sort of product innovation contract, where they're being intentionally sort of ideating with you, right? So again, as part of your existing sound, right? You can sort of always go for a scope change. And I think that's an easier route to take as opposed to sort of, going and reaching out to a new contractor always. But that's something that I wanted to quickly share, right, in response to your question. But also, if you have the ability to sort of get an external, consultant in, please do, because oftentimes, right, again, going back to this whole concept of repeatedly ideating, repeatedly sort of doing these in a focus group for stakeholder engagement needs dedicated resources, right? That's how we're being sort of intentional about innovation. Now, Trevor, I know you want to focus on the customer, right? So do you want to take that key takeaway?
Yeah, and I think we hit this pretty well in kind of our explanations, but yeah, keeping that customer in mind, that customer centricity is the most important takeaway here. So within the ideation spot and then into the implementation is key.
Yeah, and I'm going to hit the last two. Don't forget the internal stakeholders, right? I know Miles and Trevor both spend a lot of time talking about how important it is to sort of engage them upfront, both in the sort of ideation and incubation phase. And also, right, as and when you're ready to sort of transition the pilot into a program, it's very important to sort of have their buy-in, right? Especially in a mature portfolio where you have dedicated resources doing different aspects. And finally, be nimble, learn from every step, fail fast, and pivot as needed.